Hello everyone. Well, today I'm talking to Gavin Boby for the second time, and I'm sure everybody will know that Gavin Boby is the founder and the man behind the Law and Freedom Foundation, and is best known as the Mosque Buster for his work in stopping planning permission for mosques. This is the second interview we're doing, so we've got some background. You can watch that. This is going to be an update. Hi Gavin, it's really great to talk to you again. How are you?
Very well, Simon. Good to see you.
Well, good to see you. Yes, as I've just said, the first interview was a kind of introduction to your work, a lot of your basic thoughts on Islam, the problems of British society, but let us know what you've been doing in the meantime. This was about 6 months ago, you'd done 40 or so mosque planning permission actions. What's happened since September and now?
Well, I'm actually fighting number 49 now. So number 50, I'm hitting the big 50 shortly. Number 50 is coming up soon. So that one, number 50, that will be on me. I will pay the costs, the expenses, the third-party expenses of seeing that one through. So if you've got a mosque application in your area, tell me it's not going to cost you anything. Number 50 is on me. But what we've done, the one, number 49 is still going on. Number 48, that was in Newbury. And that was great fun. We had the fellow I work with, the local fellow in Newbury. I want to mention his name. I got his permission to do so. It's Darryl Hawkins, great guy. One day he should be mayor of Newbury. And he stumped up more than half the costs of the third-party costs, not money to me, but to third parties, to deal with this. And we won. And the thing that made it so funny is that the council, they tried to, it looked like they were trying to conceal what it was. A place of religious worship, public assembly, in planning terms, is classed as a D1 use. That's the class of use in the matrix, what's called the use classes order. It's D1. And the council listed it as D2, which is public entertainments. And if you look at D2 use class, it contains things like dance festivals, singing, music concerts, all of which are prohibited under Islam, some of them on pain of death. If you listen to music and enjoy it, some of their deeds say that you should have molten metal poured into your ear. So that's what they think about D2 use class and singing festivals and concerts and such like. But that's what the council tried to list it under. And so this fella, my pal, Darryl Hawkins, he gets onto the council and says, you've got it wrong, you've listed it wrong. People aren't going to know what it's really about. They're not going to be able to object. They're not going to be able to express their opinions. And so to watch the council come back and to realise they've been rumbled and to backpedal, eventually they said, well, okay, we were half wrong, but we're also half right. We'll call it D1 and D use. Let's have it as a compromise. I mean, obvious, total nonsense, but that's the way they behave. They've been rumbled. They couldn't slip it under the wire. And for his trouble, and this is really the sinister, I find it rather funny, but it's not if you're in the middle of it. Somebody, I don't know who it could have been other than the council. Somebody reported him to the terrorist police, the counter-terror police force, and he got a visit in his home from the counter-terror police force. He said actually they were very nice and very courteous to him. He actually said he got on with them, much nicer dealing with them than dealing with the council. He said they didn't know what they were dealing with. They're supposed to be a counter-terror force, and he pulled down his Quran off the shelf and said, this is why I am seeking to object to this planning application for a mosque, and read out a couple of chapters, probably the first few paragraphs of the Quran, and they were really shocked. So this counter-terror police, open mouths, couldn't believe what they were hearing. So anyway, but we won it and we turned it around. And that place has now closed. It's gone up for sale. That place will not be opening. And that fella, my pal, Darryl Hawkins, he is the local guy who did it. And he should be mayor of Newbury one day. I've even got a little quote I want to tell you from This Is What I Like. This is the meat and drink for me. A little quote from the councillor afterwards who said, it is a sad representation of Newbury. And yes, well, as a resident, I consider that just absolutely awful. So that was Councillor Elizabeth Okeefe. So Councillor Elizabeth Okeefe, sorry, the councillor for Newbury. There's plenty more where that came from. So you're going to have to get used to that. So it was good fun. We won.
Brilliant. Well, congratulations. To what extent do you think? Well, there's two things I want to remind people of. The third-party costs that Gavin's talking about come to around £600 or so. This money doesn't go to Gavin, but it pays for, I don't know precisely what it pays for, but this is what it's going to cost you. The problems that a mosque is going to bring in your area are well worth this kind of investment amongst a few of you. But moving on to...
So what I usually say to people is, you pay half those expenses, I'll pay the other half. I'll do the work,
yeah,
but you pay half the cost, I pay the other half.
Okay. So, which seems very fair enough. And as Gavin said, he's working on number 49 now. Number 50 is coming up, and that is going to be on him. So get checking your planning information from your local council to find out if a mosque is coming. What I wanted to ask you, because it sounds to me like the council were very much in cahoots with the people that are with the Muslims that are planning the mosque. Why do you think this is? And is it the majority of the council, or is it just a kind of cabal within the council who have got this pro-Muslim agenda?
Well, it's so difficult to tell because they're so opaque and secretive about it at local authorities. My guess is, well, I mean, if you look at what this lady, Councillor Okeefe, said afterwards, I think this is a good example of how the town council could help liaise with those groups, that means the Islamic group, to help them find appropriate sites. Okay, so she's saying council should liaise with Muslim groups to help them find appropriate sites. Now, you could characterize that as being in cahoots. What I think it is what I said last time, is that the powers that be, if you like, the political class, have an incentive to want to promote Islam. It's in their interest because it makes people easier to rule, more manageable. And it does that. And that's why the authorities have a particular crush on Islam. They don't have a crush on other religions like Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism or certainly not Christianity, but they do on Islam. And I think that the explanation for that is that Islam creates problems. It grinds people down, it divides people, it denies people a sense of identity. It basically means that your only identity is in who your rulers are, because people just don't have anything in common with each other. And all of that grinding down process makes people just easier to govern. It's about the will to power. That's what I think that's about. And if you can grind people down and crush them, a bit like a violent boyfriend does to his girlfriend, or the local tin pot thug, the local mafia thug, or the tin pot dictator, that's what they want to do. Grind people down and they become more dependent. And I suspect that's what's going on here. I can't see any other explanation, because everyone knows what public opinion says about the expansion of Islam within Western countries. And you've had poll after poll. I think one I saw 5 or 10 years ago said that in the UK, I think about 85% of the public wanted much, much tighter restrictions on immigration. The Dutch were polled a few years ago, and they were asked, what's the most disastrous mistake the Dutch have ever made in their entire history? And the reply came back, immigration, recent immigration. And that was really embarrassing. The French, about a decade ago, under Sarkozy, they tried to have a poll where they said, what is the essence of being French? And what they were hoping people would come back and say, it's diversity, tolerance, and democratic leaders. That's what they're hoping, because, I mean, that's any country. That's what defines you, diversity, tolerance, and democracy. So Britain differs from France because Britain likes diversity, tolerance, and democracy. France differs from Britain because France likes diversity, tolerance, and democracy. That's what they're hoping. And they eventually had to call the poll to a halt because French people were saying things that obviously didn't allow for mass immigration. So, I mean, everyone knows what public opinion is on this, and yet the authorities are determined to push it through. And I think you have to eventually say there's a reason for that. And the obvious reason that I can think of is power and money. And it's good for your power and money if the people you are having power over and getting money out of are easier to rule, are more ground down. That's the will to power. This is nothing new.
I mean, I can understand that, Gavin, at a national level. You know, our great leaders, the cabinet ministers and the leaders of industry. But on something as relatively lowly as local town and even parish councillors, where people are in cahoots with Islam, it seems rather strange to me. I don't see quite what Councillor Elizabeth Okeefe is her name. What has she got in it for? She doesn't sound like a Muslim convert to me.
No, I don't. I can't read her mind. I shouldn't pick on her as too much as some kind of specimen. That's a bit cruel. But I think what you have with councillors, if people lower down the chain and sort of pettifogging bureaucrats and council officers and what you might call the apparatchiks, they're just going along to get along. They know, well, this is the line we're supposed to toe. I'm going to toe it. What I think with a councillor is it's about money. It's a nice gig. My mum was a councillor who chaired a planning committee, and before her, it was a very rural area. My granddad was the councillor who chaired the planning committee, so I kind of understand the shortcomings of the opposition. I mean, I think that they were good councillors, but since their time, councillors have started getting paid. I think my granddad, he would get, all he got paid was, I think it was £1.26, I remember, to turn up to a council meeting. I remember it because there was one really tight-fisted councillor, and he would always punk this guy about saying, "Oh, we're going to be discussing raising our council allowances at the next meeting." So this fellow would turn up. So I remember sitting in the back of the car listening to this, and so it was £1.26 per meeting, and that was your pay as a councillor. When my mum did it, it was £11.25 per meeting. That was all the money. Oh, and you got the rental, 15 quid a month on your phone line rental, all the other calls you paid for. So that was, I mean, it cost you money to be a councillor. These days, I mean, I've had people coming up to me saying, you should be a councillor. Well, 2 councillors have done that to me. And what they say is not, it's a great way to serve your community. They say, well, you get 13.5 grand a year, you know. Yeah. And, so if you imagine, but you get that, plus money for sitting on committees, plus an expense account. And a councillor does not need an expense account. You do not. I know. I lived with councillors, my mum and my granddad. They didn't have and didn't need. It wouldn't have occurred to them to have an expense account. I reckon if I was a psychopath, I reckon I could turn 35 or 40 grand. I reckon I could turn 35 grand a year doing 2 hours fiddling expenses and putting in bent claims and getting on committees where I got paid a bit of money. I reckon I could get touching 25 to 30 grand, about 30 grand in basic, and then I could fill the expenses another 5 or 10 grand quite comfortably and without doing too much work. So you want to stay on the gravy train, just go along to get along, you know. And I think there was a lot of that.
Okay, so that was, we've gone round the houses on the subject of the basis of power. That was number 48. I don't know if you can talk about number 49, but where's the fight on at 49? This might be subject to you know. Can you talk about this?
I'd rather talk about that once we've won it, if you don't mind. Okay. Sorry.
All right. But I asked the question though. Let's hope you do.
Yes.
The last time you talked, you came across as quite pessimistic. We finished the conversation with you. You finished the conversation by putting your thumb up and saying we'll win. But it was a tough conversation we had, and in our conversations online to set this up, you'd mentioned to me that you were a little bit more optimistic at the moment. We can cover this in 2 sections. Let's review why you were pessimistic last time, and then move on to what you think we've got to be more optimistic about now.
Well, why I sound so pessimistic sometimes is in analysing the current situation. The 2 embarrassing questions that we don't like to ask is, why on earth are our politicians doing this? I think we want to think they don't quite know, they don't quite understand. No, these are very cunning, crafty people. They have a very strong urge to power. They know what's going on. When members of my family were councillors, if a car tootled along the lane, like my mum or my granddad would know who was driving that car. Pretty much any car they would know. So these people know, the politicians, they know what's going on. The reason they're doing it is the reasons I've said. I think it's self-interest, grind people down to make people easier to rule. I think that's the bottom reason amongst the powers that be. The second embarrassing question is, why are we the voters, allowing them to do it? And I think that's simply because we are more focused on survival than on civilization. And survival in a big state, a welfare state system, requires the state to support you, to support your elderly, to support you, health services, education, roads, perhaps a little bit of welfare if you go in hard times, a little bit of social insurance. And people are focused on that. People don't want to rock the boat, because if you rock the boat, if that welfare state goes down, then that is problematic, and that is what people are focused on. So that's quite a pessimistic analysis. We effectively have authorities who are working against our interests, and we are letting them do it because we're focused on survival, and civilization, or our societies, are gradually going down. That's quite a pessimistic outlook. But overall, I'm not pessimistic at all.
Mm. Okay, so why aren't you pessimistic? And I suppose there's two stages to this. There's the short term. Obviously, short term, you're working on the mosques, you're having successes. That must be a boost to your confidence. But then, how would you see things in the long term? Let's look at short term things first.
Well, short term, I think it's going to continue as it is. This is. I'm optimistic for what I'm doing because I just think I'm going to keep winning these cases. It's that's not bragging. It's just that people don't want mosques and the expansion of Islamic territory in their area. People know what it means to them, and the people who actually are most vehemently against it, most effective against it, are the liberal left progressives. So they hate the guts of people like me beforehand. Suddenly there's a mosque application, and they're very effective, very good at writing their letters and registering their objections to the authorities. And then afterwards, they revert to politically correct normality for them. So, but I mean, we're going to keep winning cases like that. It's a question of stamina to see it through. In the longer term, the reason I'd say I'm optimistic is because I think that this is an enemy which will be easy to defeat. And I would put it in those terms. I think Islam is an enemy. I think it needs to be defeated, and I think it will be really quite easily defeated. Now, I don't think just because Islam is an enemy, it doesn't mean you have to hate your enemy, as the good book says. I'm not a Christian, but there's no point hating your enemy. It warps your judgment, it twists you inside, and it'll come out sideways as well. I mean, if you decide, right, I'm going to hate Muslims, you'll probably end up persecuting Jews. I mean, that's a horrible pattern in history. Right? I mean, it's terrible. So, and that's the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. I think one of the main reasons is not that I think we'll lose. I think we'll win, but there's a possibility we might disgrace ourselves in the process. We might resort to bloodletting and massacre, which is very common in European history. But I think that defeating this enemy will be quite straightforward. I would say it's probably unavoidable. I'd put it like that, and I can go through the mechanisms.
Okay, so what are how are we going to do this? I'll put tuppence halfpenny of my own in this. After reading Douglas Murray's Strange Death of Europe, I don't know if you've read it. If you haven't, I really recommend it. It's a great book which talks about it's a great analysis of the malaise that Europe is suffering, both in terms of its identity and why it's allowing Islam to attack it. But I got to the end of that, and it struck me that one of the reasons why Christianity has fallen, and I've become a lot more. I was kind of quite anti-theist a few years ago, but I've become a lot more sympathetic to Christian. I don't actually believe in God or believe in the stories, but Christian ethics and And because I'm so interested in history, I go weak at the knees with Christian art here in Catalonia. For an atheist, I spend a hell of a lot of time in churches, and I find them very peaceful and satisfying. The architecture here is ninth century. It's just extraordinary. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I suppose this spills over into me being tolerant of the ethics. But in the same way that Christianity has suffered the analysis of the Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment thought, and basically has been dismembered. Following the Enlightenment, belief in Christianity became very difficult for most people. The thing is, Islam hasn't suffered this, but now it's in the West, it's open to this kind of analysis. People like you and me, and we read the Quran, we know what it says. It's actually, as an ideology, it's actually quite easy to pull apart. And there are two processes to this. And I know quite a few ex-Muslims, and plenty of my friend Mo Fayaz admits openly that there are lots of people in Muslim communities who are really ex-Muslims, but they're kind of constrained by by being part of this community and the fears of what would happen to you if you come out as an apostate. But it seems to me that you can criticize Islam. More and more people are familiar with what's wrong with the doctrines, and to a certain extent, it's driving a wedge between the real faithful amongst the communities and the increasing numbers of people who actually don't believe in the dogma and can see the benefits of joining a modern classical liberal democracy, basically.
Yeah. And they are to be pitied. They are to be pitied. I would not like to go through every waking moment with what I think is a genocidal hate doctrine inside me. I wouldn't, and I mean genocidal according to the United Nations Convention on Genocide of 1948. I think you can characterize Islam as genocidal. Its aims are genocidal within that definition. And or make war against the unbeliever until religion shall be only for Allah. That is genocidal. Yeah. That is genocide. So I would not like to go around with that in me. So I mean, I feel sorry for that's the people who are convinced they're right. I mean, but the ones who must realise that it's wrong, it must be awful. I feel very sorry.
I took us off I've gone off as a tangent, really. We were going to talk about the reasons why you were optimistic on a more long-term level.
Yes.
And yes, I put my tuppence halfpenny in, but I'm interested to see why you think we've got reasons to be optimistic.
Well, the reason I think how this is likely to play out is at some stage the separation between Muslim and non-Muslim society, that's going to harden and formalise. Now, I suspect that may well be accompanied by the breakdown in state authorities, financial breakdown due to excessive debt. But that could just be, that's just my own opinion. That's not really necessary to look at that for this. At some stage, you will find Muslim and non-Muslim areas just hardening out and formally becoming Muslim areas and non-Muslim areas. And at that stage, that will look like we've lost. But I think at that stage, that's probably the point at which we find that we win, because the only thing really holding up the joint for Islam in Western countries is the pandering of the politicians and state money, subsidies, handouts, welfare, grants, all kinds of. You set up some Tupney-Hackney Islamic organisation, and the local authority will come and give you a grant for it because you're promoting integration apparently, and so you'll get some money. I mean, and those things, the pandering of. I can't think of things that less safe to rely on. The pandering of politicians, that goes out of fashion pretty quick. Those are not reliable people. And the second thing is the subventions of state, like subsidies of state authorities. Those are going. If you get a financial crisis, the government is not going to be able to boast, look how much money we gave to Islamic community organisations last year. That isn't going to go by the way. So if you get Islamic areas becoming formal, Islamic areas, they will tend to become poverty-stricken. And you will tend to get questions asked like, well, if they're not prepared to accept the results of a democratic election, the law that is laid down as a result of a democratic election, the question then gets asked, should they be allowed to vote? Because if you don't, can you vote for a system that you don't accept? I mean, that's an obvious question. And then the question comes, if they're not prepared to do it, if a group of people want their own self-contained area, why should they receive welfare payments at some stage, even if the welfare, that's assuming that the welfare state is available. I think that those areas will become unsustainable, very rapidly unsustainable. And I think it will be quite easy for people to get people to leave those areas and to leave our countries without being inhumane. I think it is necessary, I would go so far as to say I think it is necessary not simply to prevent further immigration or to slow it down. I think it is necessary to have a humane policy of repatriation of Muslim populations within our lands. I think it's gone far too far to manage. I just don't think there's any way to come to terms with Islam. Well, I mean, you read the doctrine, it's about war, conquest and takeover until religion is solely for Islam, possibly an interim period where Christians or Jews, apparently mainly Christians, are allowed to live, as Unter mentioned, to be exploited for money and sex slaves. Basically, that's, I mean, not really a very nice option to be honest. But I mean, that's, so there's no coming to terms with Islam. I think what we need a policy of repatriation of Muslim people to their ancestral lands, out of our countries, but that needs to be accomplished without hatred, without violence. It needs to be accomplished reasonably humanely. And I think that can be done. Primarily, the way I would describe what I suspect will happen is it's not necessary to have massacre and violent ethnic cleansing. All that's necessary is to allow people to stew in their own juice. And if Muslim people, if Muslim areas become formally separate, this is our area now. We control this area. This is our Sharia zone. We're renaming it. And then it's hard to see how they will not have to stew in their own juice. They will stew in their own juice, and I don't think that is going to be very pleasant at all. If welfare payments stop coming, maybe half will find actually there's not a lot of point being here. And then if trade links with the non-Muslim world, the industrious, creative, productive, prosperous non-Muslim world, if they cease, then standard of living goes down further. What happens to basics? What if the basic services go down, like say electricity or gas, let alone things like drainage? What do you do if you're raising a family? And I suspect what might happen as a result of that is those areas just get bought out by business people who see that land is worth much more in non-Muslim hands than in Muslim hands. That's not attractive to a lot of people. I think there probably are out there a lot of people who say, no, I'm full of hate about this. I want some war. I want some killing. I want us to go on the front foot. You're only patriotic if you're filled with hate, if you're ready to go and kill. No, that is not necessary. And if you do that, you hand down a really bitter pill to the next generations. You tarnish your own moral authority. And I suspect it's actually really easy. It's a lot easier without that, because these areas are going to separate themselves out. That's in the Islamic coding. Move into an area, disrupt and degrade the civil society, gain a foothold. And once you've got that foothold, once you've got an area, you expand out from there. That's in the coding. That is what Muhammad did. Couldn't get up his dictatorship in Mecca, goes to Medina, sets up his dictatorship there, sets the clock at year zero from that point, and then starts making his raids and his pirate activity and his wars, blessing armies and executing people, passing death sentences and expanding out. And then he goes and gets Mecca. So that's what's going to happen. But I don't think it will have the same end. Once those places separate out, they're going to start to shrink. And then we can look at a humane solution to this problem. Which, the reason I think it's necessary to spell this out is because I think most people, Douglas Murray included, I have to say, I think he's prepared to say, look how terrible the problem is. Look how we're allowing it to happen. What he won't do, and he's a smart guy, very smart guy, good writer. His book on the Bloody Sunday Inquiry, excellent read. I'm not dissing him, but he will not look at solutions. And the reason he won't look at solutions is the reason most people won't look at solutions is they think, my God, the only way is repatriation. That means genocide. That means really violent ethnic cleansing. I can't handle that. Yeah. I'm just not going to think about that. So people don't think about it. People need to know, no, there's a way of dealing with it that is humane, that doesn't trash the towering moral authority of the Western world, particularly I have to say of the English, who have, I think, are very, very high, or the Anglosphere, English-speaking people, very high moral authority. There is a way to accomplish this without trashing that moral authority long term. You can even do it in a way which enhances the moral authority that you hand on to the next generation. So it's important to spell it out. But the bottom line is, I think it's quite straightforward. The main thing is not to lose your temper, not to get into really violent forms of hatred.
Yeah, I think.
Anyway,
I think this is what you and I have in common, Gavin. In fact, we were before we went online, I was discussing flack I was getting, in part for an article, and I suppose with me is I put my ideas out there. I'm prepared to accept if I think I'm wrong. I put ideas out in good faith. But basically, it was an article that was discussing ways of not reaching a violent future, and these include repatriation, stopping any kind of affirmative action, stopping favoritism towards. I was talking about immigration in general. I wasn't talking specifically about Islam, but it was kind of any favoritism towards other ethnicities in the UK, and everybody being treated the same, but with a program of incentives for repatriation. Because basically, my view is, if that doesn't happen, if the indigenous people of all European countries, in the sense, and indigenous people in the sense that everybody knows what an Englishman is. You and I ask any foreigner what an Englishman looks like, and it looks like something like either you or me, Gavin. We come very close to the stereotype. Yes. That doesn't mean that other people don't have civil rights, but what mass immigration has caused is this replacement of the indigenous peoples is a break in a line of history and tradition, and the line is being cut. Now, sustainable immigration at sustainable numbers would be a moderate evolution, because we can take new people. It doesn't involve being racist at all. I've got no problem with other people, but I do have a problem with other people when they appear to be taking control of something that I'm relatively happy with. So in order to avoid this confrontation, then incentives have to be put into place in order to encourage people to go back, because the worst end game is fighting in the streets, is something like Northern Ireland, but on a mass scale throughout the UK. It's the regular citizens who suffer. It's the people who live close to Muslim areas that suffer. I was discussing with Richard Inman, who leads the Veterans Against Terrorism group, who's actually a Northern Ireland vet, a great guy. And, I have concerns about, I'm getting older, old people being attacked in the street as they're trying to take money out of the bank or on their way home from the post office. Those are going to be the people that suffer, certainly in the early days of any kind of violent confrontation. And really what we need to look at is ways to avoid that. And yes, and I think this is where we concur. You've got to put forward proposals that can be discussed without people coming up with this, calling you a racist and sinister for trying to avoid what seems to be a very, very bad scenario. Okay.
Well, yeah. I quite enjoyed the abuse.
Well, yes.
Well, cancer.
It get,
It's just very funny
it gets.
because it's so stupid. It's so idiotic.
Yeah, you don't spend as much time on Twitter as me. It just gets wearing. You
Yeah,
know,
yes.
when you've spent the whole afternoon and there's about 25 people ganging up on you, all and coming up from various different kinds of insults. It's like, I'm switching this off. I'm going down to the bar now, and I can't be bothered with you anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, you've put forward your idea. So why are you so confident that you think this will happen?
Well, I suppose let's break it down. Let's look at the elements. I mean, the first thing is at some stage, what you said is we need to provide incentive for people to leave. I think Muslim people will provide their own incentive, which is the poverty and degradation of Muslim society. Islam isn't really compatible with Muslims. It's not compatible with any society. It's not even compatible with Muslim society. You look at Muslim societies around the world; they're not very inspiring. And if you break it down, well, are Islamic areas likely to harden, likely to become separated out, likely to formalize at some stage? At some stage, will they declare UDI? Well, yes, that's unavoidable. At some stage, it's within. It could come out through a number of ways. Suddenly, in 2008, so nearly a decade ago, there were found to be, when the Archbishop of Canterbury said, "Isn't Sharia law wonderful? More, please." It was found there are about 100 Sharia courts. The government is not looking into how many Sharia courts there are today. That's a form of declaring UDI. That's saying we want our legal system here, our law applies, and far outside the arbitration justification that's used for Sharia courts. That's a form of UDI. You will get those. That's one way that Islamic areas will separate themselves out. Another way is simply that the state breaks down, state authority breaks down somehow, and things settle out along ethnic lines, as they tend to do. Another way is they just get really big. That's quite a likely scenario. They get so big, it's pretty much impossible for the state to enforce its authority. It will just have to start to negotiate with it, like you're seeing in areas like Molenbeek or Rosengard. I suspect in some areas like Bradford or Oldham, perhaps Blackburn, that kind of situation is happening now, where authorities are having to negotiate with Islamic community leaders just in order to make sure that the legal system can come to some kind of compromise with them. So, I mean, if you project that out further, I think at some stage you'll get those areas just separating out. And at that stage, I think it looks... So what happens then? So suppose that happens. What is the next element? I mean, do those areas that separate themselves out, do you continue to let them vote? If they're saying, we won't be governed by the legal system that comes as a result of the election, do you say, well, we can still vote? Do you hand over hugely disproportionate welfare payments? I think the BBC reported, isn't it awful, isn't it horrible? Muslims are, I think, about 4.5 times more likely to be on welfare. That was over a decade ago. And I mean, it was billed as poor Muslims, isn't it awful for them, these terrible victims, receiving all this money, all these welfare payments. But the jizya. So do you continue paying that money, particularly when it's characterized within Islam as jizya, a form of extorted ransom for your life that you are forced to pay at knife point. So that's you stand in the gutter, you have a knife pointed to your heart, you hand over the money, and to the Muslim because you're non-Muslim. Now, again, how long are people going to say, yes, we're comfortable handing over all this money to these separated out Islamic areas? So, and then what happens in those areas if that welfare flow stops? I think quite a lot of Islamic mums will say, actually, I've got children I need to bring up here. I've got nothing to bring them up on. When you look at Islamic society itself, it's very unproductive. There are hadith that state that the income for Muslims is the jizya, the money they get out of the non-Muslims. So the money that you extort from non-Muslims, that is your income. That's what you live on. Okay. So, and Islamic society, you see, it's not productive. It's not the number of, I think, the number of Nobel Prize winners, Islamic Nobel Prize winners, is tiny. You just don't know the number of books that gets published in the Arab world is tiny. I think the number of Jewish Nobel Prize winners as against Muslim Nobel Prize winners is like number for number, like sort of 100 people, 100 people, relatively speaking.
I've got data on this, actually.
It's between 5,000 and 7,500 to 1. Yes. Okay, that tells you something about how defunct Islamic society is, how unproductive. It's got no interest in being productive. It's got no interest in creativity. That's just not a part of Islamic doctrine. It's not a part of Islam at all. So those areas are just quickly going to get poor. You will get a lot of fires in those areas. You will get people cooking over open stoves in the middle of their living rooms. You will get those areas. What happens? Do non-Muslim societies say, we're going to take your trash free of charge, for instance? Will they do that? Or will they say, no, we don't? Why should we bother doing it? All those questions start to arise. And the brunt of those questions, the brunt of that falls on those Islamic areas. And people living in those Islamic areas, I think, will gradually start to say, well, it's actually not very nice living here. It's not really worth it anymore. Or particularly, I think, and quite a few would say, this is really unpleasant. We've just got to get out. And then another element of that is simple game theory, which is basically the laws of nature. One of the principles, I mean, read any primer on game theory, is that the good tend to drive out the bad. They tend to expand and decrease the influence and area of the bad. The good being people who can keep to agreements, who are not aggressive for no reason, and who you can work with, and who do what they say they're going to do, and the bad being people who are aggressive and won't stick to their word. And what I think, if you just imagine you have an Islamic area and a non-Muslim area. The non-Muslim area is going to be prosperous and profitable because it's industrious, it's creative, it's hardworking, it values education. And that means a block of territory or an acre of ground is worth much more in non-Muslim hands than in Muslim hands, because a Muslim isn't going to do much with it. Muslim farming is really poor. Muslim industry is really poor. But non-Muslim industry, a block of territory, a non-Muslim will make it much more profitable, if only just by letting it to Muslim people who will have more money. So you will have an incentive for non-Muslim investors to go to Muslim owners of land and say, sell that land to us. It's not worth much in your hands. You're renting it out to Muslims who don't pay much rent. We will take it, we'll build factories, offices, industry there. We'll make a lot of money out of it. We'll build great big buildings because we have the technology and the ability. And that creates the incentive to sell. At some stage, that Muslim property owner will say, yeah, I can make more money selling this. And then I can go and live like a god out in Somalia or Pakistan, because and that is entirely consensual. That is not ethnic cleansing. That is not genocide. If I go up to you, if I say, Simon, can I buy your house, please? And you say, yes, Gavin, you can. And you say, oh, this is what I want for it. And I say, okay, I'll buy it for that price. And I buy it for the asking price. And then I build another house in your garden once I own it. Have I ethnically cleansed you? I mean, have I committed anti-English ethnic cleansing there? I mean, it's just not. That's a consensual transaction. I mean, you see that in the Israeli, what are called the settlements within Israel. A Jewish Israeli. Go on.
Yeah, I've got kind of three. Before we move on, there's three. I've got three questions that occur to me. Is number one, okay, the history of Islam has been very successful in conquest. They've spread out of the Arabian Peninsula. I think we're on the third mega jihad in history. There are 1.6 billion of them, so they've been pretty damn successful. That's question number one. Question number two is, The left-wing enablers, why do you think the left-wing enablers might change opinions? Because there are left-wing enablers, and then amongst them there are Marxist ideologues who actually want to see the breakdown of Western society. So this kind of atomization and separation of Western countries into totally broken up states with various power struggles going on would be in the interests of the Marxists or the people that want to destroy Western society. And finally, okay, this is obviously isn't going to happen the week after next. Have you got have you got a time scale for this? So there's 3 points here.
Yes.
Given the precedence of Muslim success, why won't this happen again? What about the left, and when do you see this playing out?
Well, let's take them one at a time. You can tell me what you think one at a time. Okay. So the first one is Islamic military prowess. Now, do I need to say anything more? Islamic, I mean, you're grinning already. Yes. Islamic military prowess. Say it with a straight face. You can't, okay? Now, I mean, just Google. Anyone who's watching, just go to Google for a second and Google why Arabs lose wars or why Muslims lose wars. You'll probably get about 1.5 million hits, 1.5 million responses. They're just, I mean, people. I am not scared of, say, Bradford declaring war on London. I'm not scared against the British Army. Okay, it's not really that scary a proposition. And tribalism, the inability to communicate, the inability in those areas, you can't train. It's too congested. You can't test weapons. I don't find that particularly scary. I don't know if there's a lot more I need to say about that. So well, I'll ask. Sorry, the gentleman who was a soldier in Northern Ireland. I forget his.
Richard Inman.
Richard Ingrams. I saw the interview. Good guy. Well, ask him how scared he is of a potential Muslim army. Okay, so I don't see that in itself being a problem. But tell me I'm wrong. Yeah. Tell me I'm wrong.
All right, the second one, the left.
All right, the left. Well, let's say you separate out. Or let's say Islamic areas separate themselves out from non-Muslim areas, or let's say that there's a drive to do that, and let's say people become, for whatever reason, non-Muslims become a bit more confident about saying, I don't want to live around Islam, I don't want to live anywhere near Islam. People are actually doing that at the moment. They're voting with their feet. That's what's happening. But supposing people say that more, and they say it more openly. Now, let's supposing those left-wing ideologues say they want to go and live in an Islamic area. You should go and live. Islam's great. It's wonderful. And to prove it, I'm going to go and live in an Islamic area. Well, good for them. I mean, what you'll find if you get that sort of separating out, what you will find is instead of living in an area that's 10, 20, 50% Muslim, let's say half the English population are those hardline social progressives. Okay, so just divide it by 2. Instead of living in an area that's 10, 20, 50% Muslim, you'll be living in an area that's 20, 40, and 100% Muslim. Which makes it that much worse, and then that much harder, exponentially worse, because it's not just about numbers; it's about confidence and psychology. What I think you'll get is a kind of feedback loop going on. And so then what you'll find is some of the less committed social justice warriors, they'll peel off, they'll start saying, well, it was all right when it was just a nice mix, but I think I'm going to promote diversity by getting the hell out of the Islamic area and going to the non-Muslim area. And then what you find is the few hardliners who remain, they are stuck in a hardline Islamic area, and I just think that separation will come. You might get a few really suicidal liberal lefties who would rather die than abandon their opinions. Well, I guess that's their choice if they want to do that. I don't. The sort of lefty liberal people, they're very opportunistic. They go where the government money goes. They go where their bread is best buttered, and they don't have a lot of character or principle. It's usually, a lot of them you find, it's about money underneath, some grant they're getting, some book they're publishing, some gig they're on, and they'll peel away when that goes. They'll peel away. I wouldn't be too. They don't scare me at all.
Okay.
But again, tell me I'm wrong.
I mean, but it's my job to ask you the questions. And the third one was, have you got a time scale for this? I mean, is this going to be in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years? What events are there any particularly crucial events that could bring this closer or possibly delay it?
Well, a pal of mine who's into investing, his timescale, he says early 2020s. That's when things start to fracture, and then you'll see the political ramifications of that. So that's when the cracks start appearing. I would have thought it would take a little longer than that. My view is that the process I'm talking about will be triggered, as they usually are, by the breakdown in government authority, the breakdown in government finances, a bit like the Soviet Union started to crack when it was obvious that its finances were going down the tubes. And so I think that will be the marker. When does that happen? Well, it's to get technical, this is my view. I don't think this is a necessary element, but this is how I think it will play out. The point at which government authority really breaks down is the point at which the annual deficit reaches 20% of GDP. So the overspend, government's overspend every year, is 20% of the whole country's production, GDP. And it's quite easy to hit that, particularly when you've got big debts. It doesn't look like that at the moment because interest rates are very low. But when you hit that level, everyone knows government's broke. Now, that seems to be a rule throughout modern history. Soviet Union, Latin America, the inflations of Central Europe during the 20th century. Once you get to that 20% mark, government authority breaks down. Because for the simple reason that then the window cleaner won't wash the council windows without money up front, because he says, well, you're broke, I'm not going to do it unless you pay me up front, because you won't pay me. So, and then government's living hand to mouth and it just falls over. And so that's, I suspect that process of government, when government debt looks like it's between 10 and 20%, that's when this process starts to kick in. When is that? I wish I knew, because then I'd make $1 billion on the stock market at the time. But I can't say when it will happen. I hate the word inevitable, so I'll use a different word, unavoidable. I think it is unavoidable. All the ingredients are there, and that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So I can't tell when you're going to next have a curry, but if I go through your cupboards, I can probably tell you're going to have a curry at some time. Yeah. So that's what it's like. Yeah,
I mean, it seems to be a very depressing scenario, but particularly for people like you and me, who were probably, I was born in 1960. I grew up into a very prosperous and optimistic society. The fact that we've got to this kind of Mad Max. It's not at Mad Max stage yet, but this is where we could be going. How would you? Yes. I mean, apart from your mosque busting work, which is fundamental, are there other essential things that you think people ought to be doing in order to combat this in the most civic way possible?
Well, I think the main thing I think people need to do is to sort of hold their nerve and sort of hold the line. To hold the line politically, not to be browbeaten by political correctness, but also that will better enable people to hold the line sort of morally, ethically in themselves. Not to think you can only be a patriot if you're filled with hate. Not to think to yourself the only way to solve this is through maximum violence. That not to say to themselves, we need a Mad Max situation to sort this out. I just don't think we do. I think a reasonably peaceable, consensual separation out that's the first step, and not to panic as well. So if you get a separation, let's say Blackburn or Bradford or the East End of London just declare independence. We are now the Islamic Republic of whichever town it is, and not to panic at that stage and to think, Christ, we've got to go berserk. We've got to hit the big nuclear button. And I think so. What will help people to do that? Really, for people to inform themselves, just rationally and clearly, not to get browbeaten, but also to do something small to stand up. Don't go and get yourself fired. If you're not careful, your boss is going to fire you. So you don't have to come out too openly. Don't do something stupid like committing a crime. It's just pointless and stupid. It doesn't accomplish anything. Like putting a bit of bacon on a mosque door handle accomplishes nothing. I mean, the imam comes out and puts it in the bin, maybe says some incantation, that's it. I mean, it doesn't do anything. Don't there's no point doing that. But sort of remain aware so that you don't panic, so you don't feel like the floor has fallen out from under your feet if this all starts to pan out. I think that's probably the main thing. Also, I would say make sure you individually are safe. That's going to make people feel better. I can remember when I was training in the law, this guy, the pupil master, he said to me, first thing you do when you open your papers, when you open the file, what's the first thing you do? And I said, well, I don't know, read the papers. And he said, no, cover your ass. And so, oh, right, okay. And what's the next thing you do? Read the papers. No, cover the client's ass. And then when you've done those things, you can read the papers rationally. So always keep yourself covered. So I'd say just make sure you're prepared for it. Make sure you've got like a network of friends you can talk to or get support from if you find if things start going wrong. I suppose the main thing I'd say is probably to quote Corporal Jones, don't panic.
Or who was the Scottish one? We're doomed. No,
what am I doing?
No, we don't. No, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's being prepared, talking to people, having a good network of friends, and I also agree with you. And this is when we were talking earlier. It's navigating that difficult line. There is a difficult line between inactive liberals who, and I'm not talking about left liberals, I'm talking about kind of moderate classical liberals who all talk about principles. This is a lot of my arguments in this week. Principles, natural rights, respect, etc. Yes. Who actually don't, yes, if we persuade them, they're going to come around. No, they're not. Yes. And it's navigating this difficult line between those people and the more nasty elements of the far right. And the nasty elements of the far right do exist. So, and one of the difficult things with navigating this position is you're going to get flack and you're going to be tarred as being something you're not. But if you're putting forward trying to put forward rational solutions and trying to have the conversation and bring the conversation into the public square and make people aware of it. And yeah, we're not talking about quoting the Quran now. I think enough people know what the problems are. But the next stage that we're on, and this is why I appreciate talking to you, is we need to be talking about solutions, what can be done. And and my personal view, I'm not even suggesting that I'm right. But the fact of putting forward proposals, I think you have to be brave enough to do it, and stand, as long as you stand up for your principles.
Yes, and can I, if I can say that's why I started doing, or why I do. One of the reasons I do what I do, because it's not just about talking about the problem. What I do is not just an ain't it awful club. It's about doing something that people need and people want, but also doing something that helps when the end game comes. People will not look at the end game. And I keep saying how wrong that is. You have to look at the end game because everything flows back from there. And that's why I'm critical of people like Douglas Murray who will not look at the end game because it appears so unpleasant. No, it's only unpleasant because you won't look at it. And if you look at what I'm doing, the reason I think it is necessary is because prohibiting mosques prevents the expansion of Islamic territory. Mosques delineate territory. They set your boundary like a fortress. And the fewer mosques you have, the smaller Islamic territory will be when the time comes, or when that separation comes, if there is some kind of rupture. And the smaller that territory, the harder it is to defend, the harder it is to militarize. You can't train militarily. You can't test your weapons. It's too crowded. It's too congested. And that means we, non-Muslim society, we are much more powerful. That land becomes much easier to take control of. Again, if we are more powerful in respect of Islam, that doesn't mean we can use more brutal methods. It gives us the freedom to use more humane methods because we have more options available to us. It's only when your back's against the wall that you're forced to use the ruthless, inhumane methods. So if we restrict the number of mosques, it will paradoxically enable us to be more humane about solving this problem. And that's necessary because there'll be generations after us. I have benefited from the moral authority that my country and my history has. When I've gone abroad, people have been aware of that. I don't want us to be the generation that tarnish that. I want us to be able, the Europeans, they can go into their massacres the way I think they probably will. That's not fit for us, and we should not descend to that level. And I don't want to hand that on to the next generation. And that's why partly why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Okay, fantastic.
It's necessary.
And okay, to close, just to remind listeners, the people that have got this far in the conversation are obviously interested in the topic and interested in what we're talking about. Let's run through the process that listeners need to go if they get wind of a mosque being planned in their area. And Gavin and I have spoken about this before, but it's you, the people in your town. If you suspect that the Muslim community wants to build a religious centre or a community centre, a theatre now, yes, or a multi-faith centre, any one of these euphemistic names, you need to be going through the council website. You need to be going through the council records beforehand and seeing what's planned. Can you add anything to that, Gavin, and then say what they need to do next?
Yeah, if there's a hint of it, just go into Google and put in the name of your council and then council planning application search, and that will lead you to your local council's planning webpage. Search for it, find the application, find it early. Don't do what a lot of people do, which is to say, oh, somebody's got planning permission for a mosque. Can you stop them getting planning permission? Don't come to me asking for a condom once the baby's been born. Okay, so try and find out about it early on, and then just tell me, and I can then go into action.
Fantastic. And the best way to get in contact with you, and this is the exciting one, up for mosque bust number 50. The best way to get in contact with you is via the lawandfreedomfoundation.org. Is that the website?
Yes. Yes.
Which, as Gavin always says, and I grumble at him occasionally, is updated very rarely, but it's got a contact form and you can get in touch with him there. Alternatively, you can get in touch with him, Gavin Boby, on Twitter, at Gavin Boby. And I'll put, obviously, as I always do with these interviews, I'll put links to all the contact information in the description box, or probably on the web page that is linked to this conversation. Well, it's fantastic talking to you, Gavin, and more reasons to be optimistic this time, I think.
Yeah, I think so. We'll win.
We'll win. Yes, as we say, we'll win. We'll definitely win. Thanks very much, Gavin, and hopefully speak to you in a few months' time, and we'll have part 3 of this conversation.
Yes, super job.
Thanks very much.